Good morning or good afternoon for those of you coming in from Europe. My name is John Willmore, and I am the head of product development with BizInt Solutions. What I want to do this morning is show you how to create IP sequence reports using BizInt Smart Charts for patents, and also the BizInt Smart Charts reference rows utility. We're going to do a couple of things. First, I'm going to start with a very simple IP sequence report, showing just how to present individual sequence alignments. Then we're going to move to a more complex report, something we call a sequence summary report. And I will do this just using a search from GenomeQuest. In the course of this, I'm going to talk about a number of different options of how you can deliver this to your clients. Then I'm going to go back and build a sequence summary report again, except this time I'm going to integrate data from PatBase and GenomeQuest. So take value added data from another database, blend that together with the sequence data. So you're going to see the sequence summary report twice, and this should leave us some time at the end if there are some questions. And at the end of the webinar, we can stay online and answer any individual questions, or we can set up an additional session later. The recipes that I'm going to be showing are available in our cookbook. There's a February 2018 edition of the cookbook available now with updated instructions. In particular, the sequence summary recipe has been clarified a bit. You can find a copy of the PDF of the cookbook at bizint.com/cookbook, but you don't have to download the entire document if you don't want. There is a link on that page for just the sequence summary recipe. So just very quickly, I want to review the types of database, or the databases that we work with when we're speaking of IP sequence databases. On the GenomeQuest platform, we work with GQPAT and dGene. And on STN today, we're working with dGene, USGene, and PCTGen. We are starting the work of adding support for blast alignments against registry on STN as well. And just as a reminder, when you're on our website, if you want to build a report from one of these platforms, under support is a section creating reports and databases from hosts, where you can find instructions step by step from each platform. And we will be taking new screenshots of the GenomeQuest platform, which has changed slightly since the last time we put these instructions up. So I'm going to leave the slides now and go into a presentation of what I mean by a simple IP sequence report. This is a very small chart here. This came from a talk by Greg Rowland on repeating peptide fragments at the GenomeQuest users group meeting last month. And what we see here are 4 sequence hits, 4 alignments from a single sequence. And it's basically a peptide fragment that's repeating consecutively in the alignment. And we've just got a number of fields here. We've got title, patent sequence locations, species, percent identity, and our alignments. If we were to export this as is today, the alignment here is going to be, the structure of the alignment is going to be lost. And I'll show you what I mean by this. I'm going to create a Word document of this very quickly here, just of the table. So I did File, Export to Word, and I'm just going to take the default. Options, yes. No. So you can see here that let's get a little bigger, there we go. We've lost all of the padding, all of the spacing in our alignments, and so nothing is properly structured. Whenever you're trying to build an export from the table and you want this to, of the table, and you want it to look correct, what you need to do is change the formatting on the alignment column. You might be tempted to go to the text menu and change the font, but this is actually not the best way to go. If you change the font, that's only changing the shape of the character, spacing is still going to be lost. Instead, under a little bit further down, there's an option here with bold and italic of fixed width. And it even has a hint, for example, alignment. And what this does is twofold. The first is that it does change the typeface, but the second is that it sets an internal flag so that when we export the alignments, the structure of this data is preserved. So now if I do File, Export, and I choose my word chart, then we see that the structure of the alignment is preserved. And this will work with exports to Word, some exports to Excel. There are some structures in Excel where this doesn't actually come through particularly nicely. I believe the one that is most problematic, just to keep in mind, is the optimized XML. Excel doesn't like rendering these pretext blocks particularly nicely. But we're going to come back and look at a couple of other ways of displaying this information in just a moment. So this is a very simple example. It's just a handful of rows, and it's a very short alignment. But if you're looking, so putting it in the table is a suitable practice. But if you're looking at a larger set of results, so this happens to be a search that we did a couple of years ago now on Cas9. We had a little over 1,000 protein records from GQPAT. And what you're going to see, I mean, the Cas9 the Cas9 sequence is actually fairly long, 1,400 residues. And you'll see that, first of all, if I make the alignment column wider here, we're only showing a part of the alignment. Remember that BizInt Smart Charts truncates text in columns because we're trying to build what we call a summary record or a summary table here, not just putting the entire alignment into the table. If I look in a particular row and bring up the record, I can actually see the complete alignment. So we have that data, but it's just not in the table there. So one option is to, there are some other options. I could generate a report that includes the records. But one of the things you'll notice here is that we're seeing a lot of alignments from the same family, from the same or from the same sequence. Now, you'll notice I'm using BizInt Smart Charts for patents 4.6.1. One of the fields that we now have available to us in exports from GenomeQuest is the unique family sequence ID. And this is, if you possibly have run into this, what this is a way of saying this is the same sequence. This is generated by GenomeQuest. It's saying this is the same sequence, and it's found in the same family. So it's a way of identifying when you have basically duplicates of the same sequence. So it's a very powerful way of finding of deduplicating, and we don't currently do anything clever with it, but we will be fairly soon. So I'm going to undo that. Now, if I was to export this right now, I'd have a table of 1,044 sequences, but like I said, this actually represents a much smaller number of families. So I'm going to save this and send it to reference rows. So File, Save, and I'm going to send to reference rows. So I'm just going to click this button here, or I could go to File, Send to Reference Rows. And what this does is basically transfers the chart over to the reference rows utility. Now, the first step, it's telling me that I need to identify common patent family. I could have done that before sending, but I'll click Generate here. Go to the next step of the wizard, and here I could rank the databases. Since I'm pulling data from only a single database, I don't actually have a choice. I can't use that ranking. And what we see now is instead of alternating rows based on, here's the first sequence, here's the second sequence, here's the third sequence, they're now by family. So this white row up at the top here is 1.1 is from one particular family. Now I have a fairly large family 2 going down with 19 sequences in the family. And again, 18 to 1, 1. So rather than showing all of that information, I could export, and the information marked here with a checkbox would be the representative value. I'm going to really quickly export this just as an HTML table so you can see it. Yeah, we'll do that. And you can see I didn't change the property of the alignment, but basically for each family, I'm just seeing a single piece of information. I'm seeing one identity, I'm seeing one sequence location, one particular sequence. So it's interesting, but it's not telling us all of the information that we have, all the different ways that we found this particular family. In this case, we had 19 different sequence alignments, query hits within this particular family. So let's go back to reference rows and let's build something a little bit more useful. One thing I'm going to do is get rid of the alignment at the moment because I have a better way of showing this to you. I'm going to just use this hide column button up here. And what I want to do is build a little, what we call a subtable, basically a collection of columns that are linked together. And I'm going to do that under the Tools menu. It says Create Subtable from Columns. And the stop processes that I'm going through here are all in the cookbook in that recipe. So what I have here is a list of all the columns that have data in them in this chart. And so I can take some of these, and what I'm trying to do here is build a, take columns that are unique, that are going to vary between rows. So for example, I probably would not want to put common family in there or title in there, because for the most part, that information is the same across all of the records within a family. But I could, for example, take the, I believe, the sequence ID number. I believe that's what I wanted. I'll take the patent sequence location. I will take the percent identity. And why don't I take the alignment length? So I'm taking a set of information that I would like to see a summary of. And again, you can take put anything in here. The one piece of information that you can't, well, I'll come back to this in just a second. The one piece of information that you can't put in here that you probably would be tempted to put in is the alignment itself. You can, but right today, the structure of the data, that text, the white space padding would be lost. So you can see that I've built a little subtable here now, and it's called Untitled Subtable. You also see that whatever the column, so I can change that. I can say, here's my alignment summary. I just double clicked on the column heading there. But you'll notice that I can't double click on the subheadings here. So I'm stuck with the names that I chose. One of the steps that we suggest before you do something like this, before you actually build your subtable, is to rename some of your columns. So instead of patent sequence location, I'm just going to, I can just change that to location, for example. And now I can go through that. I could go through that same process. I could change percent identity, for example, to percent to something shorter, so that it will fit a little bit nicer in here. And now if I run that tool again, I can do my sequence ID number, my location, percent identity, and alignment length. Same fields, but with smaller labels that will show up nicer in your report. So that's something to keep in mind. That is, again, one of the steps in the recipe. And I'm going to hide my first version of this. And I'll, again, rename this. This is my alignment summary. Now, When we export from reference rows, I'm going to go back to this example here. When we export from reference rows, what appears in your output is the data that is marked with a check. So if we look at row 2 here, you see a check mark on this particular title, this accession number, this location, and so forth. But you'll see this family's getting hits in a number of different claims. It says claim 22. We see claim 22 because that's where the check mark was. That's based on a rule. And in this case, the rule just happens to be give me the first row that you encounter. Well, you can see here in our little subtable or little alignment summary that we again have a check mark here, and it's saying give me that value. So if we were to export now, we would have a little table that gave us this particular Canadian sequence, claim 22, and so forth. But what we actually are trying to do here is see the entire family. So what I'm going to do is right-click in this column and change the rule that's used to generate this. So for every column, I can choose a rule. In this case, right now, it's just choosing based on database ranking and then grabbing the first. But I'm going to come down to the bottom of this list, and there's two rules here. In this case, they would actually do the same thing. I'm going to choose summarize all values. And what that's going to do is build a table for us of all of the content in the family. And what I will do now is say yes. And I'm going to then export this as a report. So I'm going to export first. I'm going to do this to HTML. And this time I'm actually going to include one of the backing records. Actually, I'll do that next time. So I'm going to just build a little report here. And so now instead of having just information on a single sequence within the family, I'm seeing information on each of the hits from within that family. So make this a little taller here. I have 19 alignments in this family. I can see all 19 of those. And since, so here's a better example where we have a little bit of variation in percent identity, for example. So it's a very powerful way of building a summary out of a complete family. This is not limited to doing this process on a family basis. I can show you if you're interested how to do this on a publication level on a particular publication level, or even on an individual sequence level. So let's go back to BizInt Smart Charts for patents. Here is my report, and I'm going to, what I did when I built this, when I did the search on GenomeQuest is I exported my sequence results, and then I pressed the button to transfer the publication numbers to PatBase. So I have that collection here as well. So what I have are 73 records, 73 families. And I have clipped images, abstracts. I'm going to choose a couple of different things here. I'm going to take the probable assignee, for example, and it looks like I don't have state in this set. Okay, instead of the patent assignee, which is collected from the, instead of the patent assignee, which is just collected from the front pages of the documents in the family, this is, probable assignee is looking at both the inventors and saying, they are related to this organization, but it's also normalizing the values. So this particular row 2 here, Harvard College and the president and fellows of Harvard College are both referring to an entity, the president and fellows of Harvard College, to whom all Harvard publications would be assigned. So it's basically normalizing the data. It makes it very useful for visualizations, for example. So anytime you have data from 2 different sources, you want to combine, file, combine, and it's asking me here to choose the key chart. Basically, this is the the chart that's going to be used for terminology. But more importantly, when you're going to reference rows, the order that you choose your charts is the default database ranking. So I'm going to choose PatBase first, and then I'm going to choose my Cas9 report from GenomeQuest. And there's a couple of things that happen on this panel that are important to keep in mind when you are combining charts with gene sequence data. Obviously, the first here is to give it a title. If you have just a single query, then it's safe to take this option at the top here, combine charts from different databases. But if you are running multiple queries and you want to be able to see the alignment against those different queries for an individual sequence, you need to choose this bottom option down here, combine without removing duplicates. And I'll have in the handouts that you'll get as a follow-up to this meeting, I'll have some reminders of the steps that one should go through here. But in this case, I have just a single query, and I'm taking data from 2 different sources, so I'll choose the default. So, as always, first thing I want to do is identify the common patent families. So this is going to look at my PatBase data, look at my GenomeQuest data, and build a network and assign a common family. So I'm going to sort, click on the A to Z button there. And here I have, for example, all of the sequences and somewhere down here, the PatBase record that corresponds to that family. So I'm going to choose a handful of columns here now. The process of building that subtable can happen either in BizInt Smart Charts for patents or in reference rows. This time I'm going to do it in BizInt Smart Charts for patents. And I'm going to just change my column name here to location. And by the way, yes, we are planning on allowing you to edit this. The other thing that I could do now is if I knew that some of these were not interesting, or if they were duplicates or so forth, I could actually go through and hide rows. I could remove particular values, rows from my summary report at this point. But for this example, I'm just going to create a subtable, and I'm going to start with my sequence ID number, location, percent identity, and why don't I start with my query alignment start, just to have something slightly different. So I have my little subtable here. And I'm going to save this chart. You always have to save before you send to reference rows. And now this time, when I come to reference rows, I have a regenerate button. I don't actually have to generate, I don't have to click generate to proceed. If you change the common family value, remember the common family column is just text. If I change that, I can, you do not want to regenerate because this will actually go back and run the algorithm again. So I mentioned that when I combined the charts, the order that they were combined in is going to be my ranking. So now I see PatBase first. And what that means is within every group, within every family group here, I have my PatBase record at the top. And most importantly, what that does is puts the check mark by default at the top. I have my summary alignment table here, and I'm going to change the rule in this column. And I'll use summarize unique values. It doesn't matter, like I said, they should be identical behavior in this particular case. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of patent. I don't need that. Yeah. And I'm going to export this and let you see what this looks like. Now, I'm going to export this first as HTML, and I'm going to actually include the first backing record. Remember, BizInt Smart Charts has behind every row a record, and there's a new option available in reference rows for the first record, the link for the first record to sit on the title, sit on the first column. So we hit OK. And what we see now is here I have a report that has the, come to the right, I've got my alignment table here. I have, I'm taking data from, let's come down to a smaller family here, data from PatBase for most of my columns, wherever they have data, so for example, probable assignee, but then summarizing the alignment on the right. This link over here, hyperlink on the title, takes me to a record from PatBase. So basically I can have a combination of a record from PatBase or record from Orbit or whatever platform of choice together with the alignment information from my sequence databases. So I wanted to show a couple of other ways of delivering this before I stop and turn to questions. There is another way that you can, let me get rid of that column. There's another way that you can see this information, and that is something called a summary record. And this was developed for one of our customers. It's a way of turning the table basically into what looks like a record. There's a number of options when you do this in terms of formatting up at the top, but there's a couple of options down here at the bottom. One of those is to include the alignment. And this is a really good way if you want to see complete alignments to do that. You can see complete claim set, alignments, and so forth. And what I'm going to do is so this is these are fairly complicated families, but you can see that all of that information that's in the table, all of the rows that are in the table, or all the columns rather in the table, turn into sections up in this upper portion up here. So clipped images, abstracts, including the summary alignment table. So this subtable that we created in reference rows and set the rule for now shows up in Word, in our Word document, as a table within this report. So it's just another way of seeing that. Then we also have here the complete alignment and one of the claim sets. And in this case, it's coming from PatBase, since our first record here is PatBase. And yeah, it's coming from PatBase. Now, another reason that you might want to, one of the big reasons that you would want to choose, for example, PatBase as your first record here, is, if I come back here, this, you've got a link at the top of the record here that takes you back to PatBase, to that family in PatBase, and likewise here in our, oh, I didn't include the links, my bad. There would be a link here, could be a link here as well to PatBase. So typically that's where you want to send your users to view this information. Anyways, I know that I ended up going a little fast. I see a hand raised there. Whoops. Okay, so there's a couple of questions here. Does the unique family sequence ID apply to both GQPAT or GeneSeq, or is it just to GQPAT sequences? Currently, the unique family sequence ID only applies to GQPAT sequences. At the GenomeQuest at the GQ Life Sciences meeting, they did announce that they are negotiating with Clarivate to add support in GeneSeq as well, but that's probably not going to happen until next year. So I believe we're at the end of the time here. If there are questions, I am happy to stick around and answer those. Otherwise, we are going to make recording of these steps available on our website.